Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mutahar. Boy, do we have a bit of a dark topic to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen, but ultimately one that I think will leave on a positive note. Now, I've talked a lot about the Epstein files for the last, I want to say over 6 months at this point, right? Ever since the beginning of the story, I've kind of had a bit of an interest that has always ramped up as things finally started to happen. So for the last 6 months, if you haven't been following, basically in the US, they basically released a whole bunch of these Epstein files, and you yourself can read these files entirely for yourself if you go to justice.gov/Epstein. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, these files are not completed in every capacity. They don't have every single file to my knowledge over here, but they have a lot of things that were sort of leaked out. Now, this has been a whole set of drama that has kind of happened in the entire country. And to be fair, I don't want to just use drama to denigrate what's actually been discussed here, because ultimately the end there have been, documents that have talked about people that have been co-conspirators. There have been emails that have implicated and connected various individuals around the world. Some of the biggest mass surveillance companies like Palantir, whose founders Peter Thiel have apparently been good communication pals with people like Jeffrey Epstein. So of course a lot of questions get raised, you know what I mean? How vast and how big is this proven human trafficking network? One of the things that I've done on my channel through the course of my entire career is talk about really dark shit on the internet, Some of the darkest shit that I've talked about has involved, people that have groomed children, people that have abused animals, people that have scammed the living shit out of the most vulnerable people out there. And one of the craziest things that I remember sort of hearing about years ago, when people were kind of talking on the old 4chans, if you will, were things like Pizzagate, actual human trafficking, conspiracy theories, right? And, at a time, there were a lot of people looking and saying, oh, that stuff's stupid. Oh, there's no secret human trafficking cabal with the elites. But the reality is, when the files finally come out like they do, and it's pretty much proven to the world verifiably that these files exist, what actually gets done? Now, again, when I said this video kind of will end on a positive note, I don't want you guys to sit there and think, whoa, Muta, nothing is actually getting done. To be real with you, there are real serious people that work at huge banking firms like JP Morgan that have to leave banks. There are people that are in the highest positions of power that have actually been, disgraced with law enforcement showing up at their house, putting them in fucking handcuffs. There have been probes open in basically every country that isn't named the United States of America, right? So it is kind of a black pill when the country that delivers the most justice is kind of not doing much. Now, where it becomes a really big black pill again, well, one of the most darkest revelations to have kind of come out is how the people behind this entire, law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, one of them has actually just straight up lost their fucking job in the government for daring to oppose this situation. Now, through the last 6 months, there have been a lot of files that have released. There's been a lot of talks in the town, so to speak. The people that have been releasing some of these files, people like Pam Bondi, for instance, who basically have been all but thrown out of the government because they serve as incredibly great. They serve as incredibly great. What would you call it? What would you call it? Lightning rods, if you will, to sort of move the public attention over to them, just basically throw anybody under the bus in this case. Now, Thomas Massie was a Republican individual in the United States who dared to go against his party. Now, the party is obviously the Republicans, Donald Trump being the leader, and of course everyone aligned there. They weren't necessarily taken, too happy when one of their own was going against him. So he basically pushed this entire EFTA, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, alongside his fellow co-conspirator in this case, which was Ro Khanna, a Democrat in this case, and decided, you know what, we'll work together and we'll reveal these files. Now, I want to just remind you, through the course of all of this, right, it was actually the president who was kind of okay with releasing these files to begin with, right? And of course, it was a huge deal, right? There were actually influencers that walked around with fucking binders coming out of the White House, making fucking fools of themselves, where they were like, yeah, look, we got these Epstein files. They weren't really new at the time. It was shit we had already fucking seen. But of course, as time had went on, this act was passed, and of course, the day had come by. And I would say that throughout every step of the way, it seems like the government has you have to pull the fucking government's teeth to get these files out, you know? And it's one of those things where it is genuinely blackpilling because you kind of watch, the government, right? They're supposed to be releasing information about this human trafficking situation, something that is obviously interesting to a lot of people out there because I think it's important that we should know if the people who govern us and the people who, sort of run the world are actually not fucking children in some capacity, right? Like, that's a pretty important thing. Look, I think most human beings, 99.9% of them, obviously I'm excluding the real sick human trafficking pedos in this situation. I think most human beings, again, 99.9%, agree pedos are bad and we shouldn't be governed by them and we shouldn't have them running in serious positions of power. You know what I mean? We shouldn't have people who are willing to harm the most vulnerable running the fucking world. So anyways, Thomas Massie was the one that was behind this entire, one of the people behind this, act. He pushes it through, and in the last several months, I would say that he's been under severe attack by the actual president of the United States. President Trump was like, whoa, how dare you stand up to me? How dare you how dare you put me into scrutiny? And so effectively what happened was that the guy had lost his actual, seat in the last few days for, I would say, daring to stand up to the Epstein files, right? And, if there's anything that, fucks with me the most about this is that even though now we know that there is a serious, actual human trafficking cabal that probably might still be active. Remember, Epstein died in a prison back years ago. And who knows about where those co-conspirators are at? Throughout my coverage of this entire story, one of the things that I've always kind of harped on was where the fuck are the people now, right? Epstein is dead, but I've looked at actual files like the co-conspirator files where the government graciously blacked out those files. And now we're just left asking questions like, wait, even if the guy who was spearheading this is dead, there are still other people, very rich people, very powerful people, who are still getting away scot-free from one of the most disgusting criminal activities we'd ever seen in our time. So anyways, this Thomas Massie individual was basically privy to one of the most expensive races in his entire district. So in the district of Kentucky, and again, I'm not a politics person, I don't really like talking about this stuff as much, but even a person like me who only understands my computer shit, I can at least walk you through this and show you how blatantly fucked up this whole situation looks. So anyways, this guy walks out, once he realizes that he's lost, and it came out that, of course, the people researching this, the money that was used in order to finance this person's opposition ended up being fucking insane. It was apparently a place that saw $32.6 million in ad spending. According to, basically the people watching this, $32.6 million were raised in the state of Kentucky to spread fucking propaganda slop throughout the entire, state. Now, what was really funny about this is the percentage of how many people spend money versus how inside the state versus out, right? So, when you go and vote for somebody in your fucking, district or whatever, you might be thinking, whoa, this is my district, my vote matters. No, it fucking doesn't, bro. Look at the amount of money, 91%, and again, it was high for both, it was high for actually both the people over here, but the reality of it is when it came for money from inside the state, the people that actually matter, the people, who are actually going to be governed, it was less than fucking 10%. In both cases, the money was coming from outside. So anyways, Massie lost because he dare challenged the actual political leadership at the time. And mind you, this is a guy that mostly votes, from at least my research, with the side. He just decided to do the one noble act, the one bipartisan, the one act everyone can agree on, right? You and I can disagree on a lot of things, I'm pretty sure. I'm a libtard myself, But I'm sure, if I brought, some conservative guy, we would have a lot of disagreements on a lot of key things. But if it's one thing we could agree on is, brother, the pedos are bad. He decided to make that stance, make an actual concerted push, something that I highly respect somebody like that for. It's called having principled beliefs. It's called having something to fucking stand for. He decided to do that, and in doing so, lost his job representing his people. And so you look at the money behind it too, and of course there are individuals that track organizations like AIPAC, for instance, which is like this American-Israeli Political Action Committee. A lot of what happens in America usually happens, and a lot of these fucking people get voted in, and the establishment gets made because countries, corporations pay a fucking shit. There's no cap, from what it seems, on all the money that you can put in. So the guy that replaced him, this Ed Gallerin fella, was like, super on his fucking knees for the whole Trump side. He was like, oh, sir, let me suck that dick, okay? Oh, sorry, I think I missed a spot. That kind of relationship, somebody that would never say no, somebody that would never challenge the fucking people at the top, somebody that was a good old boy, if you will, a good little boy whipped into shape here. And this is a guy that earned, apparently, according to this, tracking committee, $15.5 million from like Israel and shit. And you think to yourself, what the fuck does a small ass country on the other side of the world have in control of, like, this fucking big number one freedom country that you would find here? You have to ask yourself these kind of questions, right? Me following this Epstein stuff, as much as I look into this human trafficking circle, one thing that you can't necessarily avoid is the connection that Epstein had to the people who run the world. And unfortunately, it's those people that get voted into positions of power, right? Look, as much as I dislike things like politics, because it really mostly doesn't affect me at the end of the day, it mostly, it's just one of those things where it's like you almost have no control over who the fuck you get to vote in. Like, as much as I tell you, vote with your best interests in heart, right? I don't know if it necessarily changes or matters all that much in the grand scheme of things, because it seems like big money is always the one that decides. So the way that money obviously affects us is, like, obviously you and I believe our own things, but we're like a little tiny sliver of the internet, a tiny sliver of the world. In reality, your boomer grandparents or your fucking or your parents themselves, who probably sit on like Facebook or watch actual television, will see a whole bunch of targeted advertising. I mean, it's funny as fuck, especially around election season. Just watch the ads on television. It is the most, like, National Enquirer levels of tabloid clickbait you find against any of these politicians. Like, it is the most visceral, most filthy shit that you see. But these guys are spending millions of dollars to, like, spread propaganda and eventually convince people that, I guess, fighting against pedos wasn't in their national interest. And they'll smear whatever they need to just to get whoever will say yes to the actual, like, big elite into the office. That is the most fucked up, blackpilling part of this story, right? As much as I follow the whole Epstein stuff, I think what's so shameful about this whole situation is, look, I had a lot of respect for countries like the United States in the sense that when it came to the Department of Justice, you would think maybe that's like one division where, hey, they're going to put a lot of effort into fighting for what's right, especially when something becomes such a national deal like this. And it's just a shame that you would think the country that leads by example is probably now one of the most corrupt countries that's kind of out there too. And again, look, I think we can all argue back and forth in the comment section, but one thing that, again, speaks to me about this Epstein stuff more so than anything is, again, how connected this guy was around the world. It wasn't just the United States. This guy was friends with billionaires all over the world, whether they be in Russia, whether they be in Canada, whether they be in India, whether they be in fucking the United Kingdom. The vast network was so large, and unfortunately, it's a network that I still have very good reason to believe is definitely active. Because the moment Epstein was looked at, the whole point of these files coming out was to see, hey, now we have to look at the other people that were obviously part of this ring. Do you think this man single-handedly ran an entire trafficking operation himself? No, he didn't. Neither did his, partner Ghislaine. There was obviously other people that were blacked out, censored, and the feds didn't go after. And why they didn't go after, I have reason to believe that at this point, it's because the whole fucking system is complicit into it, you know? But look, at the end of the day, with the whole Epstein situation, regardless of how fucked up things may seem, one thing that is definitely apparent to me is outside the United States, it seems like there are some private companies, big companies like JP Morgan, that are at least looking at people's connections. There are countries like France where at least probes are being opened. So this story is far from done. But god damn, dude. The one guy that decides to stand up against it, his own party is like, fuck it. You're getting sent to the shadow realm. Graveyard for you. So, you know, I may not agree with Mr. Massey on a lot of things, but I really do hope that this guy runs as like a fucking independent again, comes back. Because from what I understand, the people that weren't consumed with the propaganda media thrown at them, like the whole ads that were thrown, the actual like group my age actually voted in his favor as opposed to the guy that got in. But god damn, dude. Standing up to the pedo elite, what does it do? It gets you thrown out of office. This is why I don't take this shit that serious. This is why I don't take it serious. This is why I don't doom and gloom over it, okay? Because I'm already so jaded and checked out of it that I know everything is fucking corrupt. And you know what? It's days like today that I get proven right in my jadedness. But you know, ladies and gentlemen, never stop talking about people like Epstein. Never stop holding the elite to task. And always, and again, this goes without saying, fight for what is right and fight for justice, you know? Out of all the most deplorable, disgusting things I've ever covered on the internet or in general, the Epstein files has been one of the most jarring things because not only is it disturbing, but it is 100% real. It happened. There's no question about it. There are actual victims for this. And every time you read a victim testimony, every time you hear them talk on national television, it sparks a fire in me like nothing else that I've ever had so far. Because I know that what I'm talking about, what I'm fighting for, what I'm discussing, has the most realist of consequences. This isn't some creepypasta. This isn't some ARG. This isn't some internet story. This isn't some goofy part on the dark web. This is a real story that deserves some real respect. And I think the worst thing we can do is just shut up and take it now that the government has proven that they're just complicit in letting the most fucked up shit happen. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.